I'm sure everyone is familiar with the dot-com bubble, not the intricacies and the ins and outs of it all, but at least the phrasing and what transpired during that time. I dug a little deeper about what caused the bubble, how it impacts us today, and certain parallels to the modern market. An economic bubble is a situation in which an asset's price is much higher than its real value. Now, I always like to ask a simple question. What is value and how is it determined by the market? Value is determined by individuals. A pair of sneakers that Michael Jordan wore in one of the NBA Finals games is still a pair of sneakers. It's still manufactured in a sneaker plant, whatever you call those things. It's still the same as a regular sneaker that you would buy at a regular sneaker store. But what gives it value is the emotional attachment to that particular product. Using that logic, you would never pay $1 million for a pair of sneakers, would you? However, if they were worn by Michael Jordan, you could see the intrinsic value. That's what happened with these tech startup companies. Essentially, over 5 years from 1995 to 2000, investors poured money into internet companies with no proven business strategy. Meanwhile, management burned through the money in an effort to grow the business and make it public. When the companies went public, more and more investors piled into the markets because they were afraid of missing out on a quote sure thing. The best strategy was to buy. Buy on the IPO and ride the wave. Ride the wave to retirement riches. Now, for those of you that don't know what IPO means, it means initial public offering. Say that there is a bakery in your town. That bakery wants to sell off shares of its company. It will have an offering where individuals like you and me can buy slices of the company. That's why it's called the initial public offering. Say the stock, and let's make this simple, is worth $100. If it goes up to $200, you can sell that to somebody else. But the whole premise is to get the initial public offering when the business is small. Therefore, when the business rises and increases in value, you can keep that, add it to your portfolio, 401k. You can sell that, you can keep that to your grandchildren. But the point is, the whole purpose of an asset is to gain value over time so you can sell that asset or you can have value in your portfolio. In 1999, at the height of the dot-com craze, there were 457 IPOs. Of those, 117 doubled in price on the first day of trading. Tech and dot-com IPOs were minting new millionaires every day, but both at the management and retail investor level. For most, though, it was all on paper. The fear of missing out sent the NASDAQ to an all-time high of 513.52 on March 10th, 2000. But then, with no warning, stocks started to sell off. By October 9th, 2002, the NASDAQ had lost 78% of its value. Investors suddenly realized that a tech or internet company with $1 billion valuation that has no revenue or earnings, is saddled with debt, and has no future is worthless. It took 15 years for the NASDAQ to soar back to those lofty heights. That's more of a larger picture. I guess you would call it macro picture of the tech bubble. The dot-com bubble, as it was referred to as in the textbooks. However, I think it's important also to look at the micro. Many people like to look at the overall picture. I feel like it is best to set the overall picture, like World War II, for instance. It's nice to set the overall picture, what led to it, the major bullet points, but then it's also interesting to go back and look at individual battles, like the Battle of the Bulge and Stalingrad and Gibraltar and all those other things. It's interesting to go look back at these little intricacies that you don't learn when you're in school. This right here that I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you individual companies that all culminated in the bubble being created. Netscape, the first company to attempt to capitalize on the emerging World Wide Web. The company's first product was the web browser called Mosaic Netscape 0.9, released on October 13th, 1994. I was born in 1993. I vaguely remember some of these companies. I remember the Netscape commercials when I was a kid. I also remember the little puppet, the little sock puppet from Pets.com. That's the only part I really remember of the company's existence. I'm almost 30, yet I barely remember this happening. It was more like little vivid memories of when you're younger and you sort of piece them together and it creates your memories. I'm almost 30, I barely remember. For people to really remember the height of this, a lot of them have to be at least in their 40s or older just to remember this event transpiring. Within 4 months of its release, it had already taken 3/4 of the browser market. It became the main browser for internet users in such a short time due to its superiority over other competition. The browser was subsequently renamed Netscape Navigator. Netscape went public on August 9th, 1995, just over a year after its funding and only 8 months after releasing the first version of its groundbreaking web browser. Shares were offered at $28 apiece before the IPO. At the opening bell, the price shot up, and by the end of August 9th, Netscape closed at $58.25, after reaching as high as $74.75 during the day. This rise valued the 16-month company at nearly $3 billion. Yet Netscape had yet to make a dime in profit. Netscape quickly skyrocketed to a share price of $174 at the end of 1995. Basically, what really created this, and I'll go over some other companies, you had a company with the word .com attached to it. Whether the company had a dime in profits did not matter. These companies would advertise to such a degree, people would see the .com behind it, and it would add some sort of authority to the product. People would put their money into this product or service, whatever the industry was, and then the company would subsequently be gone in a couple months because these managers, these people who were the leaders of the company, prioritized advertising and prioritized building up the stocks rather than actually creating a good product. But I will say Netscape was revolutionary the same way Netflix was in terms of giving you a browser. Sort of like Google Chrome is today, sort of like Internet Explorer, which beat out Netscape. If it wasn't for Bill Gates, most likely you would have Netscape on every computer. It was the first, but not necessarily the best or the longest lasting. As Microsoft began to eat into Netscape's browser share with Internet Explorer, Netscape's market share peaked at 80% in 1996 and had fallen below 50% by the time AOL acquired it for $10 billion. Essentially, 80% of internet users for a period of time were using Netscape. But by the time AOL acquired it, it fell below half the internet users due to competition from Microsoft and Bill Gates. By 2002, Netscape's market share had shriveled to less than 10%. By 2008, it was defunct. Today, it survives only at a discount as internet services brand it for dial-up users. If you've ever had dial-up, it is awful. It takes forever to dial up. And anytime you want to download any video or any game, it takes 6 hours. I remember one time I wanted to play a game on CartoonNetwork.com. This is what we did before you had sophisticated games like Fortnite. Now, the game literally took over 2 hours to download because before the game started, you had a stupid Gushers ad where the person's head became a big-ass metamorphosis looking fruit hybrid thing. And it took forever for the damn game to download. If you ever have dial-up, it is not even worth having internet. It is slower than a crippled snail going in and out of a coma. I'm telling you, it's shit. The other company that was very prevalent during this time was called Pets.com. The company raised $82.5 million. I'm sorry, I just had trouble reading this number because that's such a high number, $82.5 million, especially in the 90s, before we had all this inflation going on that devalued the currency, in February 2000, but filed for bankruptcy 9 months later. Pets.com was based on an Amazon-style internet purchasing system, where users ordered pet supplies from the website and the company arranged the delivery. Pets.com appeared to have a flawed business model from the start, which included competition with pet stores and having difficulty shipping large items like dog food bags. Also, pet supplies of all types, food, toys, clothing, etc. Why the hell would you want to put clothing on an animal? Guess you would. There was something on Shark Tank where some woman on there had clothing for animals. Apparently, the business took off like a rocket ship. Hey, free markets. You do you. It all could be found easily on the nearest grocery or pet store. Given the choice between ordering online and waiting for delivery, or walking into the nearest store and taking it home immediately was a no-brainer. In November, the company declared bankruptcy and closed at 22 cents a share. The biggest difference between Amazon and Pets.com, Pets.com actually was a subsidiary of Amazon.com for a while, is that Amazon does two things. Number one, it has exclusivity. There are certain things I want to buy, certain books. I like to read a lot. Certain items of clothing, certain products that you want to buy that you can't find at your local Walmart, your local Five and Dime. Well, now because of inflation, it would be $5 and $5. You get the point, though. You want to find, let's say I wanted to find something about the Dutch Empire the other day. That's my new project I'm reading. You can't find that at the library or local bookstore. You have to buy that book from Amazon. Therefore, it is exclusive. Number two is that Amazon lowers the prices to such a degree because they can afford to lose money, while your local bookstore can't. Therefore, as a consumer, you're going to look for the best deal, as you should. If you can buy a book for $5 used on Amazon versus $25, you're just going to get the cheaper product. Pets.com offered products you can find at your local Walmart. Now, why would you want to get a dog bowl, for instance, on Pets.com, have to wait for the delivery when you could just pick it up while you're at the store? Also, could you imagine somebody delivering a big-ass thing of cat litter? Can you imagine some little short guy picking up that 20-pound bag and laying it at your door? then you have to pick that up off your doorstep, not to mention if it's raining, not to mention if there is inclement weather, then you have to put that thing in your house. See what I'm saying? It was a terrible business model, yet it raised $82.5 million, and then in less than a year, it was bankrupt. Here is another interesting website that was during the tech bubble. It's called Webvor.com. It was a grocery store delivery service that grew too quickly, expanding to 8 cities in just 18 months. In the summer of 1999, Webvan announced it was investing $1 billion in warehouses and would expand to 26 more cities by 2001. At its IPO in November 1999, Webvan raised $375 million, and its shares traded at around $30. At its peak, it had a market cap of $1.2 billion. Unfortunately, by 2001, it was in 0 cities. Its share price fell to 6 cents per share, and it closed July 2001. Essentially, what happened with this is that it was before its time. Think about it. When you go to Walmart, they have a pickup for no charge. You have to wait the next day in most cases, or you have Grubhub now. This was essentially Grubhub before Grubhub. It was a grocery delivering services. The problem was that it expanded too quickly. And of course, as I stated before, its real value was not in its products. It was not in its production. It was not in its profits. Rather, it was in the public's perception of the value of the company. Another one, I remember this one as a kid, was called etoys.com. I remember I used to go on that website at my grandparents' house when they had the old desktop. I used to browse, looking at the Dragon Ball Z action figures, looking at the G.I. Joes and all kinds of stuff, the Legos and everything. It was created in 1997. In May 1999, eToys raised $166 million. When it did its IPO by October 1999, its share price hit $84. Like many .com stocks, the company spent millions on advertising, but failed to generate much money. In 2000, eToys reported a loss of $74.5 million. By February 2001, you could snap up eToys for 9 cents. Another one which I found very interesting, and I sort of think a lot of these cryptos copied it, was called Flooz.com. It was an online currency promoted by Whoopi Goldberg. Let's not comment on that woman right now. Let's just say I'm not a big fan. Which was designed as an alternative to credit cards. Unlike a gift card or a credit card that you could only use at a specific retailer, Flooz could be used at many locations, similar to Bitcoin and other crypto today. Despite raising $35 million for investors, Flooz went bankrupt in 2001. In less than 2 years, the company was done. The tech bubble, although all of these companies ended, it had some revolutionary implications. But before we get to that, let's talk about the 2000 Super Bowl. What relevance does this have? It featured 14 advertisements from 14 different .com companies, each of which paid $2.2 million per spot for a 30-second ad. Think about that, $2.2 million. Basically, there was a company, let's say shit.com, right? I'm just going to put .com behind it. And because the word .com was behind it, the public perception was, oh, this company is going to skyrocket. So Mike gives me $84 per share for shit.com, and instead of using that money to manufacture rubber shit, I used it for advertising. I used $1 billion of that money, over $1 billion, just to have a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl before it was profitable. Eventually, the market always catches up. People saw, oh, these companies were overvalued, and the companies went bankrupt. Now, Here are a few positives, and then I will get into the parallels of today, and then I will be done with all this. A few positives. Number one are the companies that survived the tech bubble. It was Amazon, eBay, Microsoft, and E-Trade. Now, the reason these companies survived is because they had superior products. The reason you have all these internet browsers today and the infrastructure that is able to have the capacity for all this data being stored is because of the competition between Microsoft and Netscape. They were going back and forth together. Amazon was forced to become a better store due to its competitors. Here's another positive. The infrastructure built in the bubble is what provided the systems necessary for mass adoption. All that selling of networking and storage cloud allowed cloud services to become a thing. Basically, if the internet grew organically, we would still be years behind on the network infrastructure. In 1990, only 2.6 million people had access to the internet. 5 years later, 45 million, and the number of people was doubling every year. The recent report that I read stated that over 70% of the population in the United States, and it's growing substantially each year, has access to the internet. And now the government is trying to give individuals high-speed internet, which I think actually is a positive thing. Think about it. Nowadays, without access to the internet, you're not able to communicate with as many people. You're not able to buy and sell as many goods and services. Many jobs, if you walk in there, tell you to apply online for their applications. Without high-speed internet, you're essentially still riding a horse in the age of the automobile. That's sort of how I perceive it to be. But that would indicate then that over 80% of the population in the future is going to have the internet. And of course, with the growth of the internet, I could see entire cities. You already see Google and other companies that are creating smart cities, Alphabet Inc., but that's Google's parent company. Essentially, these entire cities are going to be run on the grid using that technology, but that's another story for another day. The parallels to today. For 5 straight days, the markets have been down. That's because if you look at certain medical companies, during the height of the COVID hysteria, they were pumping these IPOs. People thought, okay, these companies like blank that's going to offer the blank, wink wink, riser that's going to offer the vaccine, I don't want to get this video more censored than it's going to be, is going to be very profitable. People pumped in money to these companies. Once the COVID hysteria moved away and now everything is about Ukraine, these companies went sinking in quicksand. And that's sort of what happened during the stock bubble. The dot-com bubble, rather. These companies were overvalued and eventually the market caught up with these companies. But that's basically what I have on the dot-com bubble. Another interesting thing that I just thought of, and then I'll conclude. The Pets.com sock puppet was, in the very beginning, a mascot of the possible prosperous.com websites being created. It was on talk shows. It even had its own float in the Macy's Day Parade. I remember it vaguely. However, after Pets.com sunk into quicksand and these other companies followed, it became an effigy as everything that was wrong and bad with the dot-com bubble itself. Kind of like these historical figures like Columbus become effigies for everything wrong with this and that. They create mascots and symbols and things like that that really describe and are emblematic of that era. But that's all I got. Thank you for listening, if you made it this far.